and we can move into our first session of the day. I feel like this is going to be an interesting one and probably some questions at the end. So I think there's no harm in us starting maybe a minute early, Samson. Okay, over to you. Samson, your mic's not working for me. Is it for you? You're not on mute. No, not yet, Samson. Again, it's not muted. Maybe it's something in your sound settings. Nope. There we go. I can hear something now.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Perfect.
Takes us perfectly to 10:15, Samson. So that was well nicely done.
Amazing. And can you see my screens as you'd expect to?
Yes, we can.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to join today. I'm really looking forward to some of the amazing sessions you have on the agenda. As Chris mentioned, I'm Samson. I work for the Social Mobility Foundation. And in today's session, we plan to provide a bit of a scene setter on where we are in 2023, the current social mobility picture in the UK and the specific barriers that young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are facing in education and work, the progress we're seeing in terms of employer-led social mobility, and where there's still more work to do. So before I get into the meat of the session, a very brief introduction to the SMF and where some of the insights we'll be talking through have come from. So since our charity was formed in 2005, our mission has been to unlock potential, broaden horizons, and create opportunities with and for ambitious young people who face structural barriers in education and work because of where they grew up, where they went to school, or the occupation of their parents or guardians. And we deliver on our mission through 3 strategic interventions. Through our Aspiring Professionals programme, we're directly supporting young people, nurturing their knowledge, confidence and networks to support them in realising their academic and professional potential. Every year, our Aspiring Professionals programme welcomes over 2,000 high-achieving young people from low-income backgrounds across the UK and supports them to access top universities and competitive professions. The SMF supports students across every UK nation, and the majority of our students are on free school meals or in the first in their family to go to universities. And students join us in year 12 S5 and stay on the APP for over 5 years. Through the Social Mobility Employer Index, we're working with employers to ensure that people from working class backgrounds can get in and get on in professional life and to improve the representation of individuals from working class backgrounds. The Social Mobility Employer Index is the leading authority on employer-led social mobility. And in 2022, we received submissions from 149 employers, collectively representing around 1 million employees in the UK, a real testament to the importance of social mobility among UK employers. Through our advocacy and campaigning arm, the Department for Opportunities, we campaign on structural issues affecting social mobility and amplify the voice of young people from working class background. Over the past 3 years, Do campaigns have reached millions across the UK, driving practical change and sparking significant conversations around everything from the digital access gap to the class pay gap. So what is the current picture? In 2023, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what your parents did are still real predictors of education and career outcomes in the UK. And whilst talent is spread evenly across the country, opportunity isn't. In fact, according to a number of reports, the UK has lower social mobility compared to all major EU countries. And this has consequences for the country and employers, as well as for the individuals. And an impact assessment completed pre-pandemic estimated that low social mobility will cost the UK economy £140 billion a year over the period to 2050. Social mobility is as important an issue now as it was when our charity formed in 2005. More young people are living in poverty, and the attainment gap between them and their better off peers is growing. Young people eligible for free school meals have historically had lower educational attainment, and are over 18 months behind their peers by age 16. Over 20% of teachers in deprived areas say their school is offering no specialist careers advice, whilst 60% of young people from low-income backgrounds say they've lost confidence in themselves since the pandemic. The pandemic has shone a national spotlight on the issue, as the impact of COVID-19 has not been equal, with the long-term effects disproportionately impacting young people, especially those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Looking ahead, the cost of living crisis will continue to exacerbate the issues our students face and could undo much of the progress made in recent years in improving outcomes for disadvantaged students, as low-income families feel the impact disproportionately and school resources continue to be stretched beyond capacity. And the barriers don't end after school. Where you go to study at university can have a big impact on which employers you'll be most attractive to. Russell Group universities still dominate the figures for applicants and acceptances for index entrants, with half of applications and 2/3 of graduate entrants from these 24 universities. Additionally, in 2022, 44 index entrants last year saw more than 75% of their graduates come from Russell Group universities, and 13 had more than 90%. Too many employers rely on Russell Group universities when entry to them is highly dependent on applicants' backgrounds. Just 2% of Russell Group students were eligible for free school meals, while nearly 1/3 had attended private school. In fact, young people from the most advantaged backgrounds are 5 times more likely to attend Russell Group universities than comparable peers. If a student from a lower socioeconomic background does make it into a top university and a top firm, the barriers don't stop there, and there are still disparities in rates of progression and pay. In relation to pay, new research shows that employees from working class backgrounds are being paid less than their middle class peers. Even when people from working class backgrounds successfully enter professional occupations, more privileged counterparts still earn £6,718 more per year. That's a 13% pay gap and the equivalent of working 1 in 7 days for free. Classism is an insidious force holding people down that rarely shows itself explicitly. For the last couple of years, the SMF's advocacy and campaigning arm, the Department for Opportunities, has sought to spotlight the issue and encourage employers to measure and close the class pay gap. And in 2022, we released a 15-minute short film to support the campaign. And I'd strongly encourage you to watch and share it with your teams. And you can find it at www.staydown.co.uk. In 2023, addressing low social mobility is a moral, social, and business imperative, and the workplace is as important as the classroom. Britain remains a deeply elitist nation where someone's chances of getting a well-paid job in a top profession are still strongly correlated with their social background. However, several employers have come to the realization that a different mindset and a different set of processes are needed to make their intakes more representative of the public they serve. These employers are making these changes both because they see the social need to do so and because they recognize the business benefit that greater diversity can bring. The Social Mobility Foundation's Employer Index is a celebration of those who are trying to tear down the barriers that stand in the way of too many able and aspirational young people getting a fair chance to succeed. They're employers who have used the cost of living crisis as a call to double down on social mobility. And we've seen many positive examples from firms proving that it's possible, even in the face of profound social mobility headwinds, to make progress. But these reasons' optimism are tempered, however, by some evidence that the momentum amongst employers to embrace the social mobility challenge is being lost. Before we get into the reasons to be hopeful and the areas where progress is needed, a little bit of context on what the index is for those that may not be familiar. Ensuring that your organisation is open to accessing and progressing talent from all social backgrounds is an organisation-wide effort, and there are steps that we can take across the employee life cycle. The Social Mobility Employer Index is an annual benchmarking initiative we deliver to encourage firms to become more accessible to individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and to celebrate best practice. The index looks at an organisation's efforts across 7 key areas proven to impact social mobility, including work with young people, routes into the employer, attraction, recruitment and selection, data collection, progression, culture and experience hires, and advocacy. The index then marks the submissions, benchmarks entrants against their peers, and provides valuable feedbacks to entrants to inform their social mobility strategy. As I mentioned, in 2022, we received submissions from 149 employers who collectively employ close to 1 million people in the UK, a real testament to the importance of social mobility among UK employers. So as I mentioned, from the 2022 index, there were several reasons to be hopeful. In relation to outreach, we saw some really encouraging steps being taken to address the impacts of COVID and the cost of living crisis on students' ability to engage with outreach. With the impact of the pandemic and cost of living crisis leading to a growing attainment gap in education, accessible and impactful outreach is more important than ever and can play a significant role in helping young people navigate these crises. The pandemic has created extra work for young people to move online to access opportunities, a burden particularly felt by those for whom access to a strong internet connection and high-functioning tech equipment is not guaranteed due to their lack of financial resources or location in an area with poor connectivity. If such access is taken for granted by employers, a significant barrier to entry for young people could be created. Our Unheard Voices research suggested that the cost of living crisis is among the 3 most important issues to young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's encouraging to see employers taking steps to factor this new economic reality into their programs, from supporting students with tech and accommodation to covering lost learnings. Firms are stepping up to support students weather the costs of work experience. On routes into the employer and attraction, many employers are taking seriously the call for increased opportunities targeted at young people who might have otherwise been left out of the internship pipeline. The proportion of index entrants with internships ring-fenced for young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds increased in 2022, with 44% of entrants doing so in 2022, up from 29% in 2020 and 37% in 2021. The proportion that are being ring-fenced based on reliable predictive socioeconomic background has also improved, which is really encouraging. We also saw positive movements in the balance of Russell Group and non-Russell Group university visits. Overall, in 2022, 39% of all university visits were to Russell Group universities. This is down from 50% the year before, so a decline which we welcome. We also saw a number of great initiatives in place to attract applicants from low socioeconomic backgrounds into graduate recruitment and apprenticeship routes. And you can find a number of case studies in the 2022 Key Findings report, which is published on our website. In terms of recruitment and selection processes, encouragingly, 30% of entrants don't have minimum grade requirements for their graduate programs, 40% of entrants don't look at candidates' grades, and a further 34% place them in the context of the school or college applicants attended, which is a really encouraging development. We're also now seeing some really compelling data analysis coming through from organisations that removed minimum grade requirements previously and have since tracked the performance of candidates that would previously have been unsuccessful. The analysis is strongly reaffirming the need to do away with recruitment systems that place too much emphasis on academic performance, which is not a reliable indicator of in-work performance. In 2022, we also saw organisations doing more with the socioeconomic background data that they've collected. For example, analysing it in terms of occupation areas and also geographic mobility. We also saw a positive increase in organisations reviewing progression, retention and pay versus previous years. 24% of entrants were now collecting data on progression, 19% on retention and 19% on pay, all of which are vital for ensuring that individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds get on after they've got in. A number of firms are now also publishing this data and have committed to closing the class pay gap, a really encouraging step and one which is being actively encouraged by a number of sector bodies. So as I've reiterated, there are a number of really encouraging developments in 2022 and some brilliant examples of best practice. However, there is, of course, more work to do. On outreach, we were concerned to see that targeted outreach appeared to have worsened into 2022, and that not enough of the young people most in need have access to these programs. In the 2022 index, 93% of all schools outreach was targeted at non-selective state schools, down 5 percentage points versus 2021. And 42% of the young people were eligible for free school meals, down 16 percentage points from 2021. Employers need to better monitor who takes part in their activities to ensure that their work is targeting and reaching the right people, and that they're having the desired social mobility outcomes with any outreach work. Similarly, we saw many organisations continuing to offer unpaid internships, which are unacceptable during a cost of living crisis. In 2022, 8% of entrants hosted unpaid internships, while a further 15% only paid travel. This means that nearly 500 people were expected to work without any pay at all, while more than 8,000 were paid only their transport. Internships should be mutually beneficial, but unpaid roles are only accessible to those able to work without pay. So it's no wonder that just 18% of young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds strongly agree that internships are open to everyone. In terms of recruitment and selection, whilst 30% of entrants don't have minimum grade requirements for their graduate program, 40% of entrants don't look at candidates' grades, and a further 34% place them in the context of the school or college, all of which is really encouraging. The widening attainment gap means action on contextual recruitment is more important than ever, and we hope that it will become more commonplace over the coming years. We'd also like to see more organisations flagging candidates from low socioeconomic backgrounds in their recruitment process. In 2022, 42% of entrants flagged students with certain socioeconomic background characteristics for a re-examination of their performance in the context of their economic circumstances later in the process. And 40% took a second look at those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who would have otherwise been rejected. Targeted measures like these are likely to produce positive outcomes for employers when applicants who would have previously been overlooked are given the opportunity to prove themselves and become top performing employees. And we would like to see this becoming more commonplace in the coming years. We were also concerned to see over a quarter of entrants implementing exit fees for graduates recruited who don't complete their graduate placement. We asked about the use of exit fees for the first time last year, as we're concerned about the disproportionate impact of this practice on young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds in their early careers, who may not have the knowledge or confidence to understand the implications of signing up to a contract, and will not have the financial means to pay the fees due or negotiate a reduction. We would strongly encourage organisations to review their approach to these fees, and if they are planning to charge them, take steps to improve the practice. Apologies. Oh. Sorry, laptop has a life of its own. So yeah, we would encourage organisations to take steps to improve the practice. At a minimum, where employers consider it is fair and proportionate to recoup some of the costs of training through exit fees, they should ensure their approach is communicated explicitly in adverts, contracts and other information, and should ensure that this practice is clearly explained to prospective recruits before contracts are signed. Where exit fees are levied, they should be proportionate to the value of training received, and employers should be conscious of the financial and mental health implications of debt recovery and offer reasonable repayment plans. Over the years, we've seen excellent progress on SEB data collection, and in 2022, nearly 3/4 of entrants collect at least 3 data points on their current staff, which is really encouraging. But while 60% collect parental occupation for current employees, the figure is 48% for new hires and just 24% for unsuccessful applicants. And these rates should really be more consistent across different groups. Employers should monitor their recruitment process to identify barriers for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and act on their findings. Collecting data on unsuccessful applicants can show who struggles to get into organizations, highlight unconscious bias in the recruitment process, and identify priority areas to be addressed to increase workforce diversity. So we hope to see greater consistency in what data is collected and from whom. Similarly, whilst it's very encouraging that the proportion of organizations analysing data on progression, retention and pay has increased, with only 24% currently collecting data on progression, 19% on retention and 19% on pay, these numbers are simply not high enough to achieve the sort of wide-scale change we hope to see. So that was a very brief snapshot on employer-led social mobility, the progress we've seen and where more is required. For more information on these areas and the other areas we assess throughout the index, you can find a link to our 2022 key findings report on the index website linked on the slides. Additionally, if you haven't already entered, we would strongly encourage you to consider doing so this year. Each organisation who enters receives an individual feedback report highlighting areas where they performed well and where improvements can be made, and how your organisation performed compared to other index entrants in each section. So whether you're at the beginning of your journey and are looking for guidance on how to get started, or have already made some progress and are looking for a steer on where to go next, the index can be a valuable tool to inform your social mobility strategy. You can also enter the index anonymously, which I know is important to several employers. Submissions opened on the 13th of March and close on the 9th of June. And you can find our information on what we look at and how to get started on our website linked on the slide. For now, I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have on anything that we've discussed today.
Thanks so much, Samson. Yeah, as always, a pleasure to hear you speak, and loads of really, really interesting statistics and information. So we have got a few questions, and just to encourage people as well, I forgot to do so at the start, but there is a Q&A function at the bottom. So if you do have questions throughout, put them into the Q&A, and you can do that now as well, and we'll try and get to as many as possible. So we've got a bit of time now. The first one, Samson, is just someone's asked for you to repeat a statistic, if possible. So I'll get that one first. So it was just, can you please repeat the stat about organizations who now don't request a minimum grade entry?
Yeah, so it was 30% of organizations that entered the index in 2022.
Amazing, thanks, Samson. So that's of the employees in the index, right? So nearly a third. Brilliant. Okay, I'm seeing people are liking questions as well, which is really good. That allows me to choose the most popular ones. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. How can employers guarantee that social mobility support continues after a candidate has secured a role with them? Nice big chunky one to start, Samson.
Yeah, really big question. So we've seen some amazing initiatives that organizations are exploring within their organization. I mean, firstly, as with most things on social mobility, it begins with data. So understanding what potential barriers individuals who join your organization might experience once they have started their early careers with your organization. So collecting data on progression, especially in early careers, whether that be collecting data on in-role performance, appraisal grades, success in exams that you have to complete in your early career, can all be really helpful in informing steps that organizations might want to take to provide additional support. And then providing additional support specifically targeted at individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds, in addition to broader support that you provide to employees across the organization. Similarly, we know that organizations have often seen disproportionate levels of attrition for young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds who join their organization. So taking steps to ensure that your organization is welcoming to individuals from low socioeconomic background. So whether that be at the internal advocacy piece of encouraging employees to share their social mobility stories, standing up some of those additional support and mentoring schemes that I alluded to. And then there are more practical steps that you can take around progression as well. So, for example, reviewing the role of internal sponsors in your organization and ensuring that within the internal sponsorship process or kind of project allocation, individuals from low socioeconomic background are experiencing a level playing field with more advantaged peers, and that your background doesn't affect the projects you're allocated to, the clients that you're engaging with, or your progression in the long term.
I feel like you could have definitely talked for longer on that, Samson, but that was a good answer. Thank you so much. All right, we've got a clear winner so far for the most popular question. So often academic grades can act as a filtering method when there is a high volume of applications. What can you suggest as an alternative way to screen high volume applications at this early stage?
That's a great question. We've seen a number of organizations who have looked to leverage kind of strengths-based assessment tools. So there are a number of tools out there in the market where you can assess strengths-based, which can be supportive of reducing the reliance on academic criteria. Similarly, for organizations that do need to use academic requirements or do continue to see a value of using academic requirements for their organization, I think the important thing is ensuring that they are contextualized. So not just looking at academic attainment, but looking at academic attainment in the context of the school or college attended or the individual's socioeconomic background. Because outperformance can be a more reliable indicator of potential future performance than pure academic attainment, previous academic attainment. So potential to use the current tools available for strengths-based assessments. And I think there are other examples in the 2022 Key Findings Report, which have currently slipped my mind, but that would be one recommendation.
Thanks, Samson. That's brilliant. Okay, so a few more. We're going to rattle through them. So of the 140 employers in the index, this is from Chloe Halls. Thank you. Do you have any information on the geographical locations of those companies and if this has any impact on the data?
Well, that's a great question. So we do collect data, we do collect insights on where employers have offices, where their head offices and where they themselves have an office. And across the index, we see a really varied mix of organizations enter. So we have organizations who are based in London with a head office, but also have a kind of office footprint across the UK. But we also have organizations based regionally. So I don't have a steer on exactly what that would mean for the specific data points alluded to, but we do have a reasonable spread of different organizations across the UK represented in the index. Obviously, when an organization looks at the index key findings report, you're just seeing a snapshot of the top 75. So there are another, for example, 74 organizations that entered last year. I think last year we had 26 sectors represented in the index, and we had a reasonable geographic spread across the UK. So it is a reasonably representative sample. I would say that there is a slight leaning towards organisations based in London or headquartered in London, given the maturity of the kind of social mobility conversation in different sectors, which may have an impact on the data.
Thanks, Samson. As always, we could probably dip in more to these questions, but I'm conscious I want to get through as many as possible. Samson, you can add him on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll be open for a chat if you want to learn more. Okay, Sam Parkin from Jaguar Land Rover, thanks for your question. So Sam would love to get your thoughts on how employers can support relocation for students when moving for graduate jobs. Conscious that monetary benefits upfront can be difficult if the student subsequently decides to drop out before their program begins. So this is a barrier for organizations being able to provide such financial support upfront. And any thoughts on that one at all, Samson?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen organizations taking a couple of different approaches to that. Some organizations have, as Sam suggested, provided kind of a relocation package upfront. Other organizations have explored what steps they could potentially take to offer a kind of more hybrid approach for their first few months, so that they, can begin their role based where they are in the country, and then as they start to earn and settle into their role, then look to relocate over an agreed period. So we are seeing organizations who are exploring those hybrid options to see whether there's potential scope to be a bit more flexible in how often they're required to come into the office at the beginning, so that they could potentially kind of move down over a slower time frame rather than having to move necessarily before they begin their role. There are challenges with that, because obviously there is real benefit from being in the office a lot when you're first settling into a new role, to get face time with new colleagues. So I think that's a challenge that a number of organizations are currently teasing out, and are kind of trialing different approaches to. But I don't think there's a definitive answer that's come through the index on kind of how best organizations could or should approach that.
Thank you, Samson. So next one, an anonymous attendee. What advice would you give those of us who want to shift the dial on social mobility in our organizations, but who have stakeholders who might be fixated on the Russell Group unis, or the unis at the top of the group tables? How can we have those conversations? How can we change minds within organizations?
Yeah, amazing. Well, a plug for, I think it's the next session in the agenda. Tom Leas, who is at Brown Jacobson and has entered the index previously, has had these conversations actively at his organization, and has some really interesting insights, which he shared on a podcast, which some of you may have heard. Tom, I'm sure, can connect you in with in his session. But I think what we typically see is organizations really need it to lean into the data. We're quite fortunate that over recent years, there's been some really strong data coming through on social mobility rates in English across the English universities. For example, the IFS report on social mobility in English universities, which provided really detailed insights in the universities across the UK based on mobility rate and access rate. So there's some really compelling data about who is getting in and who's getting on at these universities. And if organisations are committed to improving the socioeconomic diversity of their early careers intakes, it's important to recognise that by focusing on a small group of universities, you may be inhibiting broader efforts you are taking to improve the socioeconomic diversity of your early careers intakes. And we're absolutely not saying that organisations shouldn't be visiting the Russell Group universities. It's just that they shouldn't be visiting Russell Group universities to the exclusion of all others. So it's about having a good balanced approach to all those universities. And some organisations, I know it's been a difficult conversation to move or improve the balance of those universities represented in their attraction activity. So it's not a big bang moment. It's a progressive discussion and looking to improve that balance over years. But the headline would be lean into the data and learn from Tom Leas in the next session.
Good question. You've scared me a little bit, because I was always pronouncing him as Tom Lias. Well,
apologies, Tom, if I got it wrong.
No, one of us is in the wrong, so but I might just say Tom when I introduce. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got loads of questions. I'm just trying to keep track. Okay, a question from Reg Amoa. I've noticed there is a real problem in recruiting boys for work experience program, and I've continuously brought it up. I'm one of the few men working in D&I, HR, CSR, etc. And I feel like I'm the only one challenging it. When social mobility is restricted for young men, we get really bad outcomes in communities. So an interesting one there. Any thoughts on that, Samson?
That's an interesting one. So the question is that when an organisation is focusing on social mobility outreach specifically for young men, they're seeing negative outcomes. Is that the question? Yeah,
I'd imagine so. I guess struggling with numbers for males on work experience programs. So is that something that you've come across, Samson? And any sort of prompts of how this particular might be able to help there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and not one that I've heard before, or something that I've seen kind of reflected back to organisation through the index. I mean, generally, we encourage organisations to pursue a gender balance as well as a decent balance of kind of ethnic background when focusing on social mobility outreach, because it's important to consider diversity, equity and inclusion holistically. In terms of steps that you can take to specifically increase the number of young people, young men from lower socioeconomic backgrounds within your outreach activity. I know that with some organisations like the Social Mobility Foundation, there is scope to be kind of specific. So, for example, if in your broader schools outreach activity or your broader work experience activity, it might be worth whether you could engage with a specific partner in this space who can look to connect you with engaged young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds who meet other specific kind of characteristic that you're keen to have well represented within your outreach. But in terms of improving the engagement of those young people specifically, that's not something that we've had reflected back previously. But it may be worth kind of collecting feedback on in addition to kind of collecting feedback on kind of participant satisfaction and the kind of qualitative feedback, it might also be interesting to look at the kind of education and career outcomes, if you can track that for individuals that have engaged in your program, to see whether there is other data points which would suggest that the individuals you're getting onto your program may not be the right fit for the specific programs that you're running. But that wouldn't necessarily be specifically connected to gender, but would be an interesting one to explore around the engagement piece more generally.
Thanks, Samson. Really am firing them at you, so you're doing great so far. Okay, so there's one about schools, and for the person that's asked this question, I'd definitely encourage them to come along to the session later, how to engage with young people, because we're going to touch on that. But for you, Samson, school has a huge effect on the outcomes young people achieve. What work is going on to help schools understand what students need to do to be successful at getting into and progressing at work?
Amazing. So I mean, across the index entrance, we've seen employers putting an awful lot of effort into engaging with schools directly to support specifically fill the gap around careers guidance. So from an employer perspective, looking to engage with schools to provide support around that careers guidance piece is really important. And as we kind of mentioned right at the beginning of the session, with resources tight in schools, specialist careers advice is not necessarily top priority when there are other things that they need to spend their money on to support their students. So any support that employers can offer to kind of bridge the gap is enormously valuable. I think when it comes to that outreach work, I think it's important to, again, think about the need. So which schools are going to benefit the most from your insight? So rather than just reaching out to the 10 schools nearest to your office or whatever is kind of easiest operationally for you, thinking about the targeting of those schools. So to have the best social mobility outcomes, do we need to reach out to schools in more disadvantaged areas or social mobility cold spots across the country? What support can we offer? There's a lot of data available on kind of FSM eligibility rates within schools, the lowest performing schools. So I think if you are limited in the schools outreach activity that you can engage, making sure that you're specifically targeting that outreach at the schools where the students need your support the most is a really important step. And then I think in terms of I think that one of the important parts is also then connecting that schools outreach into your broader outreach work. So looking to connect students you engage with at your schools outreach, through your schools outreach, into the broader outreach activity you're doing with young people, but also your early careers recruitment and attraction activities. So thinking about how you're connecting young people that you engage with in a session with a school, how you're connecting them into your work experience, how you're connecting them into any mentoring schemes that you might be running, how you connect them into regular newsletters or mailings you might be doing about early careers opportunities, and then looking to connect them through into the recruitment pipeline.
Thanks, Samson. Really good. Maybe we'll get through one or two more. This one is a tricky question, but I'm sure you can offer your thoughts on it. So, what is your opinion of the value of placement programs at universities? So data shows that employers tend to target 2-1 and above at this level, meaning students who would most benefit from experiences are being overlooked. how can universities do better here? And also, how do we counter the argument that students with lower grades not succeeding to a placement, taking a year to work, could have their academic performance negatively affected further? So how can we sort of counter the argument that taking the gap will have a bad impact later?
Amazing. So I think from an employer perspective, I think it's important to, if you are engaging with a university around a work placement program, I think it kind of ties into this conversation around minimum academic requirements in your early careers recruitment activity. So it's important to understand whether minimum academic requirements are a good proxy for in-role performance. And if they aren't necessarily a good indicator of future performance, how are the minimum grade requirements serve you other than bringing down volumes? And if minimum grade requirements aren't necessarily a good predictor of future in-role performance for your early careers recruitment process, then similarly, they're likely not a good predictor for performance for that placement program. So if minimum grade requirements aren't required for your early careers recruitment or aren't necessarily a good predictor of in-role performance, can you further engage with the universities to put that opportunity out to young people who may not have met a 2-1? So if 2-1 is not a good, if achieving a 2-1 is not a good indicator that someone is going to perform well in their early career at your organization, can you look to get rid of the 2-1 minimum academic requirement for your early careers opportunities? And can you also engage with the university to remove the 2-1 requirement for that placement scheme? So I think the important thing is having that data available and understanding whether academic requirements are a reasonable proxy, whether they are adding value to your recruitment process and are an accurate predictor of future performance, or perhaps they aren't, and you might want to consider removing them, not just for your early careers recruitment opportunities, but also for those placement opportunities. And then I think from a university perspective, it's engaging with employers around an advocacy piece on that minimum academic requirement. So universities should be actively challenging employers around whether those academic requirements are necessary or a good proxy for who's going to perform well within their organization, and whether they could potentially offer out that opportunity to other candidates within the university who may perform, perform better in the long run. And also, facilitating those where possible if an employer does want to move away from the 2-1 minimum requirement for young people to engage.
Brilliant, thanks, Samson. Real quick one about how to find out what schools in our areas have the highest percentage of free school meals. Is that readily available data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't remember off the top of my head where it is, but it's linked in the index guidance notes. So if you check into, and I think it's included in the key findings report as well. So I can send that to you, Chris, in case you want to send that over after the session. But equally, if you access the kind of documents connected to the index on our website, we have guidance on where you can find data on schools that you engage with from an outreach perspective there.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. There's a few more questions we're not going to be able to get to, unfortunately. Thank you so much for all the questions, and thank you so much for your time, Samson. That was really interesting. Yeah, as I said, Samson's always on hand to offer advice to employers and universities alike. So drop me an email if you want me to introduce or anything like that. Thanks so much, Samson.
Thanks, Chris.
No worries. Okay.